My wife smirked after this divorce. I'll be living off your fortune for the rest of my life. Then I handed the judge an envelope. Seconds later, she asked Mrs. Aldridge, "Are you telling this court you had no hidden accounts?" The smile vanished from my wife's face. She sat across from me in that courtroom like she'd already won. Vivian, my wife of 14 years, was leaning back in her chair the way she always did when she knew she had the upper hand. One leg crossed over the other, pearls around her neck that I'd bought her for our 10th anniversary, and this smile, this slow, satisfied smile that she wore whenever she was about to get exactly what she wanted. She had no idea what was inside the envelope I was holding in my lap. "My name is Graham Aldridge. I'm 47 years old. I've been a certified financial planner for 22 years, working out of a mid-sized firm in Atlanta, Georgia, right off Peachtree Road. I spent more than 2 decades building a career that could weather market crashes, client panic recessions, and the kind of slow financial bleeds that destroy families quietly. I thought I'd seen every kind of financial disaster there was. I had never anticipated that the most devastating one would be sitting 3 feet away from me in Courtroom 7 of the Fulton County Courthouse, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. But before I tell you what was in that envelope, before I tell you what happened when I slid it across to the judge, I need to take you back because none of this makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning is not pretty. Before we get into all of it, if you're new here, subscribe. Hit that bell. And if you've ever been blindsided by someone you completely trusted, drop a comment below because I know I'm not the only one. Like this video. If you want to hear the rest before it gets, Vivian and I met in 2009 at a conference in Buckhead. She was working in event planning. I was presenting a seminar on retirement portfolio diversification for small business owners. Not exactly the stuff of romance novels, but she walked up to me after the panel and asked me a question that nobody had ever asked me before. She said, "Do you actually believe the advice you're giving, or is this just what you're paid to say?" I laughed. I hadn't expected that. She was sharp. She was beautiful. And the question was genuine. She actually wanted to know. I said, "Both, honestly. But when they overlap, that's where the good work happens." She smiled and handed me her card. We dated for 2 years before we got married. The wedding was in Savannah, Georgia, September. Spanish moss hanging off every oak tree. The Savannah River sparkling in the distance. Her family came in from Charlotte. My family drove down from Knoxville. It was everything we'd both imagined. The first few years were good, really good. We bought a house in Brookhaven. Vivian started her own event planning business. Upscale corporate events, charity galas, that kind of thing. I kept growing my practice. We didn't have children, which was a choice we'd made together early on. We traveled. We built something that from the outside looked like the kind of life people work their whole lives toward. From the outside, the cracks started showing around year 8. Vivian's business had taken on a different shape. She wasn't just planning events anymore. She was being absorbed into the social world of her clients. The dinners that ran until 2 o'clock in the morning, the weekend site visits to venues in Hilton Head and Sea Island, the phone calls she took in the garage, the credit card statements I wasn't supposed to see. I'm a financial planner. I see numbers the way a doctor sees an X-ray, and what I was seeing in our accounts told a story she wasn't telling me. I didn't confront her right away. That's not my style. I watched. I documented. I waited. It took me 3 months to understand the full picture. And when I did, when I sat down one Sunday morning with a spreadsheet in front of me and a coffee going cold beside it, I understood that the woman I was married to had been systematically moving money for well over a year, not stealing from me, not exactly, but redirecting, funneling, positioning. She had opened 2 accounts I didn't know about. She had moved funds from a joint savings account we'd set up for home renovation, over $80,000, into those accounts. She had paid for things she'd told me were business expenses but weren't. She had been, in the language which I use with clients every day, liquidating marital assets. She was preparing to leave, and she was making sure she was well positioned when she did. The thing about being a financial planner is that it teaches you patience in a way most careers don't. You don't react to market volatility with panic. You assess. You strategize. You move when the time is right. So I called my attorney. Her name was Sutton. Lena Sutton. 14 years practicing family law in Atlanta, and the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes the smartest person in it, without making you feel like a fool for not knowing it first. She'd been recommended to me by a colleague who'd gone through a particularly brutal asset division 2 years earlier. He said, "If you want someone who fights clean but fights hard, call Sutton." I called Sutton. She listened to everything I told her. She looked at the documents I'd compiled. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Graham, how long have you been sitting on this?" I said. "About 90 days. She nodded slowly. "Good. That gave us time we needed." She started asking me questions I hadn't expected, about specific transactions, about timing, about a particular document, a financial disclosure form that Vivian had signed as part of a refinancing we'd done on the Brookhaven house about 7 months earlier. The form where she'd certified under penalty of perjury that she had no separate financial accounts or assets outside the marital estate. I told Sutton about that form. She got very still. She said, "Do you have a copy of that?" I opened my briefcase and put it on her desk. Sutton looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at me and said, "Graham, I need you to trust me completely for the next few months. Can you do that?" I said, "Yes." And that was the beginning of the envelope. Vivian filed for divorce 11 months after that meeting with Sutton. She filed first, which I knew she would. She'd been planning this for a while, and filing first gave her a certain narrative advantage. Her attorney, a man named Preston Waverley, was one of those buckhead lawyers who wore his suits like armor and spoke in the measured cadences of someone who had never once doubted himself in a courtroom. Vivian's ask was aggressive. She wanted the Brookhaven house. She wanted half of my retirement account's 14 years of maxed-out contributions. She wanted half of my business partnership stake. She wanted alimony, substantial alimony, the kind that would let her, in her words, which I heard second-hand through Sutton, maintain the lifestyle I built alongside him. When Sutton told me the initial demand, I didn't react. I just said, "What's our response?" She said, "Nothing yet. We wait." I trusted her. The months between the filing and the hearing were some of the most uncomfortable of my life. Not because of the uncertainty. I've learned to live with uncertainty. My career is built on it. I help people plan for futures they can't fully see through markets that are irrational, through life events that arrive without warning. Uncertainty I can handle. What I couldn't handle easily was the performance of it all, because I had to keep showing up to our shared house, sleeping in a guest room watching Vivian move through our home like she was already mentally redecorating it without me. She'd hired a decorator. I know because I saw the estimate on the kitchen counter, laid out flat, not hidden, because why would she hide it? She thought she was in control. She thought the story was already written. She was already planning the post-Graham version of Brookhaven. New paint colors, new furniture layout, a woman moving through rooms that she had already decided belonged to her. She was also talking. A lot. To friends, to her family, to the network of women she'd built through 15 years of event planning. The story she was telling. I heard it from enough people that the outline became clear. Graham was emotionally unavailable. Graham was controlling with money. Graham had always prioritized his career over their marriage. The interesting thing about being a financial planner is that people assume you're cold, calculating, that you see everything in terms of assets and liabilities, including people. Vivian had leaned into that perception. She'd crafted a version of me that fit neatly into a narrative of neglect. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that while she was building that narrative, Sutton was building something else. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October. Atlanta, in October, is the city at its best. The humidity finally breaking the sky, doing that particular shade of blue you only get in the South in autumn. I drove to the Fulton County Courthouse off Pryor Street, parked in the deck, sat in my car for about 4 minutes, and then picked up the manila envelope from the passenger seat. Inside that envelope was a single document, 11 pages, and a date. Sutton met me outside the courtroom. She looked the way she always did, composed, precise, ready. She glanced at the envelope in my hand and said, "You've got it," I said. "Right here." She nodded. "We wait until Waverley finishes his opening. Let him build the whole thing, then we respond." I said, "How long do we give him?" She smiled slightly. "As long as he needs." We went in. The courtroom was not packed. Divorce hearings rarely are, but there were enough people present to make the room feel charged. Vivian's mother was there, seated behind her, with the expression of a woman who had decided I was guilty before the proceedings began. 2 of Vivian's closest friends were in the gallery, and Waverley had brought a paralegal who kept a separate notepad, which I noticed. Vivian walked in 3 minutes after I did. She was dressed impeccably. Charcoal grey dress, her dark hair pulled back, those same pearls. She didn't look at me when she came in. She went straight to her table, leaned over to say something to Waverley, and then sat down with her hands folded in front of her. She looked calm. She looked certain. Judge Patricia Okafor took the bench at 9:15. She had a reputation in Atlanta family court. Rigorous, impartial, exceptionally attentive to financial detail. Sutton had mentioned this when we talked about case preparation. "Okafor doesn't miss much," she'd said, "which works for us." Waverley opened first, and I'll give him this. He was good. He built a picture of Vivian as a woman who had invested 14 years of her life into a partnership that benefited me far more than it benefited her. He talked about her event planning business and the way it had grown, partly because of the professional network she'd cultivated through my career connections. He talked about the social capital she had brought to our marriage. He talked about the sacrifices, the children she hadn't had, the career pivots she'd made, the years of building a home and a life that now, according to Waverley, was being walked away from by a man who had always prioritized financial accumulation over genuine partnership. Then he talked about what Vivian deserved. He said she deserved to be comfortable, that after 14 years, she was entitled to share in the financial security that she had helped build. He said the word entitled 3 times in his opening. I counted. At the table across from me, I watched Vivian's posture change. Her shoulders settled. Her chin lifted slightly. She turned to her mother in the gallery, and I saw the small, quiet smile pass between them. This was the smile. This was the one I'd seen that morning. The smile that said, "I've already won." Waverley finished his opening and sat down. Judge Okafor made a note, then looked at Sutton. Sutton stood up. She was calm. She didn't rush. She said, "Your Honor, before we address the merits of Mrs. Aldridge's claims, we'd like to submit one document for the court's review. I believe it will significantly reframe this proceeding." Waverley looked up from his notepad. I reached under the table and picked up the envelope. Sutton walked it to the bench. Judge Okafor took it, opened it, and began to read. The courtroom was quiet for about 45 seconds. Then Judge Okafor looked up, and she was looking directly at Vivian. She said, Councillor Waverley, are you aware of this document? Waverley's paralegal leaned forward. Waverley himself held out his hand, and the judge's clerk passed him a copy that Sutton had prepared. I watched Waverley's face as he read. He's a controlled man, professionally controlled, but I watched something move across his expression that he couldn't quite contain, a flicker of alarm that lasted only a second before he got it back under control. He looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at him. And then for the first time that morning, she looked at me. I held her gaze. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Judge Okafor adjusted her reading glasses and leaned forward slightly. She said, Mrs. Aldridge, I want to make sure I understand this document correctly. This is a financial disclosure form you signed in connection with a mortgage refinancing executed 11 months before you filed for divorce. Is that correct? Vivian looked at Waverley. He gave the smallest of nods. She said, Yes, Your Honour. And on this form you certified under penalty of perjury that you held no separate financial accounts or assets outside the marital estate. A beat. Yes. Judge Okafor set the document down. She looked out over the courtroom for a moment. Then she said something that I don't think any of us expected. She almost laughed. It wasn't a full laugh. It was a controlled thing, a judge's version of it, suppressed quickly, but it was real. She pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth, composed herself, and then looked at Waverley with an expression that could best be described as strained patience. She said, Counselor, in my 17 years on the bench, I have developed a particular appreciation for irony. Your client has filed for divorce citing, among other things, her husband's financial control and her own financial dependence. She is requesting substantial alimony and asset division on the basis of that dependence. Waverley said carefully, That is correct, Your Honour. And yet the judge said, The document I'm holding indicates that at the time of this certification, 11 months before the filing, your client had already established not one, but 2 separate financial accounts containing collectively assets in excess of $130,000. Assets, she declared, did not exist. The gallery did not erupt, but it shifted. I heard Vivian's mother make a sound. I heard one of Vivian's friends whisper something, and across the table, I watched my wife of 14 years go a color I had never seen on her face before. Not pale, something past pale, something that meant the whole architecture of what she had built over the previous year was collapsing in real time. Sutton was already on her feet. She said, Your Honour, we have additionally prepared documentation of 11 specific transactions over a 14-month period in which marital assets were transferred into those undisclosed accounts. We are not alleging that Mrs. Aldridge is unintelligent. We are alleging that she made a calculated decision, documented and datable, to misrepresent her financial position while simultaneously building a case predicated on that misrepresentation. Waverley stood. Your Honour, I'd like to request a brief recess to sit down, Counsellor. Judge Okafor's voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. He sat down. The judge looked at the document again. Then she looked at Vivian directly. She said, Mrs. Aldridge, I want you to understand something. This court has significant discretion in how it treats perjured financial disclosures. The presence of this document, particularly given the claims you are making in this proceeding, is not a minor complication. I would strongly advise you to consult with your attorney before we continue, because what you are asking this court to award you and what this document suggests about the foundation of your claims are not compatible. Vivian said nothing. Her face was still that color, that ghost white, stripped clean color that meant the mask had come all the way off. Sutton said quietly, Your Honour, We'd also like to note the specific date on Mrs. Aldridge's signature on the financial disclosure form. The judge looked. She looked again at the filing date of the divorce petition, and then she made that sound again, that controlled, restrained, almost laugh. And she said, she signed this 12 days before retaining divorce counsel. 12 days. She had already been planning to leave. She had already opened those accounts. She had already been moving money. And then she signed a legal document certifying none of it existed. Sutton said, "We believe the timeline is significant, Your Honor." "So do I," said Judge Okafor. "I'm not going to pretend what came next was easy. It wasn't. Recess was granted. Waverley and Vivian disappeared into a conference room for 35 minutes. Sutton and I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench outside Courtroom 7, and she bought 2 coffees from the cart down the hall, and we didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. The document had done what it needed to do. When we went back in, Waverley had recalibrated entirely. The confident, precise opening was gone. He moved through the rest of the proceedings, carefully retreating from the more aggressive demands, recasting several of Vivian's claims in softer terms. He was trying to salvage a position that had been fundamentally undermined. Vivian did not take the stand. The final ruling took 3 weeks to come down. Judge Okafor is thorough. When it came, it was not what Vivian had planned for, not remotely. She received no alimony. The reasoning was explicit. The court found that the financial dependence argument was not credible given the documented existence of separately held assets. She received a portion of marital equity in the Brookhaven house, a fair portion based on actual contribution, rather than the inflated claim that had been filed. She received nothing from my retirement accounts. She received nothing from my business partnership stake. Sutton called me when the ruling came through. She said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Tired." She said, "That's the right answer. It's been 8 months since that ruling. I'm still in Atlanta. I kept the house, bought out Vivian's equity, and I've been slowly making it feel like mine again. There's a project in the back garden I've been working on. Something to do with my hands that isn't numbers. My father used to say that every man needs one thing that doesn't respond to intelligence, something that just responds to effort. I'm trying to find mine. My practice is intact. My retirement accounts are intact. 14 years of building something survived because of one piece of paper with a date that told the truth when nothing else did. Here is what I want to tell you, because I think it's the thing I needed to hear, and no one told me. When someone who loves you, or who used to love you, or who said they did, decides to take something from you, they count on one thing above everything else. They count on you being too hurt to be clear, too angry to be patient, too emotional to be strategic. Vivian counted on that. She thought the version of me she'd spent 14 years watching would be too blindsided by her departure to notice the numbers. She thought I'd react. She thought I'd confront. She thought I'd give her the chaos she could use against me. I didn't give it to her. I'm a financial planner. I know that the worst decisions are made in the moments of highest emotional volatility. I've watched people destroy their own retirements in a single panicked week because they couldn't hold steady. I've watched them lose decades of compounding growth because they reacted instead of responded. I responded. I called Sutton. I documented everything. I waited 90 days. I handed a judge an envelope at exactly the right moment, and when Vivian smiled that smile across the courtroom, that slow, certain smile that said she'd won, she had no idea that the envelope was already on its way to Judge Okafor's hands. She'd signed her own name to her own undoing, 12 days before she decided to walk. The date on that signature was the thing that changed everything, not because I was clever, not because I was ruthless, but because the truth has a timestamp, and I knew where to find it. There's one more thing. About a month after the ruling, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. When I did, there was a brief pause, and then a voice said, "Graham." It was Vivian. She didn't say much. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't expected it to go the way it went. She said she'd been seeing a therapist, and she was starting to understand some of the decisions she'd made. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted to say it. I listened. I said I appreciate that, Vivian. And I meant it. Because here's the thing I've learned at 47 that I didn't know at 33 when I married her. Forgiveness isn't something you do for the other person. It's something you do so the other person stops taking up space inside you that you need for better things. She doesn't take up much space anymore. The day I got that call, I went out to the garden. I worked for about 2 hours in the late afternoon light, and it let in a little sunshine. But fall is something else. That soft gold that comes in low and hits the red maple leaves and makes everything look like it's glowing from the inside. I thought about the envelope. I thought about Sutton's almost smile when I walked into that courtroom. I thought about Judge Okafor's controlled laugh. And then I thought about my father's hands calloused, certain always moving, and the thing he used to say, "Some things only respond to effort." I kept working,